Yeah, I think we can start, and yeah, I'll turn the waiting room off as well so people can join in the middle-ish as well. But yes, like I said, thank you everyone for joining. I'm Muslim. I'm one of the business development associates at Collegio. So I could quickly like to start with like Collegio, what Collegio is, what we do, and then yeah, I could like hand over to Abu Bakr as well. Not waste a lot of your time. I know you guys are here to like hear about like writing a common app essay, which I feel like Abu Bakr is like best place to talk about. But yes, I know a lot of you guys have been like following Collegio for a while. You guys are probably like our active users already as well, or coming from the Learn community. So yes, wouldn't like give you a lot of useless information that you guys already know, but just some stuff like we started building our product about last year. Earlier this year, we also became venture backed, and since then we've been like adding new features, improving the current features as well. And now we're at a place where we have like more than 12K users. So yeah, that's really exciting for our team in general as well, especially like it's the college application cycle, and we are seeing like a lot of people like who are using our platform. So yes, like that's why I joined the team when I was interviewing at Collegio. My reason for joining was being able to make the college application process more accessible, because I've navigated the college application process myself as well. For the USA, I did not end up studying in the USA because of like how complicated that common app application process was. I did not have access to webinars like this. I did not have access to products like Collecto, even Learn for my school years. So yes, you guys are in a much better ecosystem right now where there's a lot of support, and it's really exciting that you guys are able to like find those resources yourself and attend webinars like this. I'm sure it's going to be really, really valuable. I know a lot of you guys are working on your college applications already. So yes, make the most out of this. I know this is you guys are using probably our AI as a reviewer, or probably integrating the US of AI generally, in different writing styles and everything. So I think this session is especially supposed to, like make that process a bit more easier for you guys. I know like even colleges, now they have criteria and everything, all of that. You kind of being able to like distinguish, what is really AI generated and what's not. And we're gonna like talk to you in this webinar about, what should be AI generated and what should not be. And I think that's what Abu Bakr should I will be talking about as well. I know I'm just gonna steal one quote from Abu Bakr that I've been using like for the past like days, which is like, we don't want you guys to outsource your thinking. We want you guys to outsource other stuff. And I think this is what that session's about. But yeah, over to Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr, just it'll be nice for us to know your background, where you studied, where you did your high school from, and like what you applied for in college, all of that. I think it'll be exciting for us to like get started from your college application journey.
Yeah, thank you. So this should be interesting. My name is Abu Bakr Sial. I did my A-level, the Cambridge A-level program, which is technically equivalent to the AP courses in the US, and the IGCSE is equivalent to the US high school. So I did the Cambridge curriculums, not the US high school program. And from there, I did it in Pakistan and then applied and went to Purdue University in Indiana. I'm presuming a lot of you are familiar with it. I did my degree in aerospace engineering and then joined the education sector in 2015. And since then, that's what I've been doing. And just to quickly tell you about what stuff I've been up to in the education sector. So mostly I teach physics, at times I teach calculus and SAT English and math. Some people find it surprising for a person to have a background in physics and then be teaching English, but it happens to be the case. I've always been fond of reading and writing. With that being said, again, an important point you must keep in mind is that the resources or the tools you have available in the present moment are far greater than actually what we had available. For instance, when I applied, college counseling or mentorship wasn't really a big deal. So it was very sparsely populated, and people themselves weren't too familiar about the whole process. So I did the application process myself. And when I was writing my essay, I had to write it myself, review it myself, and just basically submit the applications. I didn't have a lot of support or somebody working directly with me as a mentor. So given that you people have that opportunity, I'd say, of course, make the best use of it, and we'll just get going. So what we're going to start out with firstly is how to think about what constitutes or what makes a great standout essay. And of course, a lot of you probably know that this is perhaps, one of the best places in the application where you can stand out and show who you really are, because regardless of what grades you have at school or what standardized test scores you have, those things, are kind of generic. A lot of people have those. So the scores actually do not or are insufficient to differentiate you. And the best way to differentiate yourself is through the story of your life. And that's, where the essay comes in. So you want to make sure that you want to highlight your uniqueness in the application and basically talk about the journey you've been through, and then talk about some particular or specific real life examples that you can bring into the context of the prompt that you select. So we'll go step by step. Step number one, talking about how to select the best prompt for your essay. What I generally recommend is that you should pick three prompts when you're about to get going instead of one, and write just what comes to your mind, just a first draft of an essay in all three of those prompts. Now, once you have those three essays, let's call them A, B, and C on three different prompts, of course. When you read the essay or ask some others to read it, you will get a very good idea yourself about which essay is the one that's creating the most impact. Unless you write on a prompt, you'll never know which prompt is going to work best for you. So I generally don't recommend that you pick a prompt directly and start writing on it and then refine it and then submit. It's better to start out with three of the ones that you think you can write on. Once you write, you'll get a great idea of which essay it is that helps you stand out more and is more reflective of the person that you are and your experiences. So once you've done that, you then, of course, discard two, you stick with one, and then you just continue to refine that. Some things you want to remember, of course, that they're really interested in knowing your personal voice. So try to bring that in and don't borrow ideas or worldviews from things you've heard or other people are saying. Try to really capture what you think intrinsically and talk about that in the essay. Again, so that they can know who you really are as a person. And for instance, some people have a difficult time understanding this idea of uniqueness. And I think that's really important. I should take a couple of minutes to talk about that. So if you think about who you are, how many siblings you've got, what family you belong to, what country you were born in, where you were raised, what schools you attended, what personal experiences you've gone through, hardships, struggles, success stories. When you combine all of that into a single set, there's going to be no other person in the world who will have the exact same things in a single set. So you see, it's obvious that every person is unique, but in the context, to be more specific, it means that your experiences, and your outlook on life is basically what sets you apart from other people, because they will have different experiences, they will have a different outlook, and they will process their struggles and experiences differently. So keep that in mind and try to capture that again in the essay when you write it. And then the whole essay is basically a game of storytelling. And then that brings us to the starting point or the first paragraph, how to set the tone. Now, when you write the first paragraph, you want to make sure that you start out in a way that's great for grabbing the attention of the reader, which of course is going to be the admissions officer. Because if you have a generic starting, you have put yourself in the shoes of the admissions officer and think that if you're reading about 100 essays a day, maybe more, and you come across introductions that are more or less similar, you can imagine you're not going to be very keen to know the rest. One good way, again, that I recommend is that you can write the first paragraph, ask some other people to read it, and then ask them just one question. Ask them, how interested are you in knowing the rest of my story, given that you've read the first paragraph? Now, if it makes them curious to know what's about to come, what's going to come later in the essay, then that means you've got a great starting point. And think of it as a trailer of a movie. When you watch a movie trailer, you know from personal experience. At times you see a trailer, you're like, I'm not really bothered when this movie is coming out or what it's about. But some trailers, you watch them and you're like, oh wow, there's a lot of hype. Everybody's talking about it and they want to watch the movie. They're keenly waiting for it to come out. That again is clear indication of capturing the attention of the audience. So think of it from a storytelling perspective. The whole essay is supposed to tell one coherent story. And of course, there are elements that come into it, where one of the most important elements is to start strong, where again, you want to grab the reader's attention. And it should be, a fresh perspective on something. And then again, storytelling will come into play. Apart from these things, authenticity is really going to matter again, because if you're trying to follow a template, you sort of compromise on that uniqueness aspect. which is this biggest differentiator for any student applying to almost any university in the US. They want to know again who you are. So think about how you can bring your personality, your character, and your experiences to shine through. And then another really important thing, you might want to note these things down because we're trying to hit all the main aspects you need to observe in your essay. So generic statement, for example, if somebody makes a claim, I'm hardworking, I'm persistent, I've got a lot of resilience. Don't do that. Uh, the rule is that show, don't tell, meaning that if you just tell them you're hardworking, they're not going to buy it. You have to link that directly to certain examples or a particular example where you demonstrated the fact that you are hardworking or you demonstrated that you are persistent. So use examples to say that this is how I demonstrated, a key quality in my character. If you just tell them, they're not going to believe it because everybody can say it. So you have to talk through experience. So that is a very important rule as well. Show, don't tell. Then another point is, touching upon the idea of vulnerability. So, for example, when you talk about certain struggles or failures that you faced in life, you need to understand that facing failure is very normal. Yes, from a societal perspective, it's not really something that's really cheered, but it's okay to talk about your struggles and setbacks through life. But the most important thing is to set those in the context of your own growth and your own learning. So you say that, for example, let's say you say, I took initiative. I wanted to start a small business. I did ABC, went through these steps, didn't really work out. You can then talk about how that affected you and how have you taken that in your stride. And now, how are you going to use the learnings from that experience to move forward with a stronger approach or to increase your odds of success? So, if you frame it like that, it's okay to talk about failures that you faced in life. You don't have to worry too much about saying, don't try to come across as a perfectionist, by the way. That will not help your case because everybody knows, people who particularly have more experience know that there is no such thing. Every individual has strengths and weaknesses, but when you're talking about weaknesses, make sure you particularly tie that again to how those experiences would help you grow because they want to know that you're an adaptable person and you have this lifelong learning quality in you, which is perhaps the best quality any person can have. But again, demonstrate it through your experiences. And the next thing, we move on to the structure and the flow. You could think of it as three, key parts: the starting, the middle, and the conclusion. We've already talked about the starting, in terms of grabbing the attention of the reader, coming across as, something fresh and refreshing that they want to learn more about. And in the middle, of course, you're going to be expanding upon the context that you have set in the opening, whether you're going through an event or multiple events or experiences, whatever the details are of whatever you're going to discuss. And then when you come to the conclusion, you want to make sure that you tie it all together and also link the conclusion back, to the theme that you've introduced in the essay. That's a big one. And we'll talk about that using the example essay that I'm going to show you in just a bit. And then another key thing is, how do you make transitions? Now, again, when you look at a strong storyteller, think of a great novel that you've read. If you look at the flow, it goes from A, B, C, D, and so on and so forth in such a smooth manner that you don't feel there's any disconnect from one idea to the other. It's a natural progression. That's how you should think about your essay as well. Try to have one sentence naturally lead on to the other. It's a natural flow. And that keeps the train of thought going in the mind of the reader. If your flow is kind of interrupted in between, then when the person's reading it, you see in between, they have to struggle more to really understand what you're saying, one. And number two, it takes away their interest because it requires effort. You want your essay to be an effortless read for the admissions officer. So that's, again, a really good way to think of it. The less effort that's required to understand it means the better the flow and the structure. And then, a couple other points is that the essay is not a narrative. You're not just telling them a story. This is also extremely important. What you're doing is that you're using a story or an example or an incident to talk about how those things have affected you and how have they, again, allowed you to evolve into the person that you are today. Where did you start? What did you go through? How did you go through those things? What have you taken away from those things? And where do you stand today? Why do you stand here today? Right? That is going to be a result of your experiences, your learnings, your mistakes, perhaps things that you've done well. So you have to talk about how those things have shaped the person that you are today, not just simply give them a story, because the story on its own is not going to do anything. And then again, the conclusion needs to tie back into the prompt of the essay, because that's exactly what you're addressing. So some people at times think that the conclusion is perhaps a regurgitation or a repetition of everything that's been said before. If anybody thinks like that, you should address it, because that's not the right way to think about the conclusion. The conclusion is supposed to synthesize everything you've said. It's not a repetition, but it picks all of those things and brings them to basically put them like that as a whole. Whereas these are the individual elements, and you want the conclusion to do that, right? Where it all comes together. And then similar to how you're starting out, when you're ending, when you come to the conclusion, you must try to leave a strong impression. And again, you want to tie, as we said, the conclusion back to the theme that you're addressing, and be reflective in the conclusion, while summing it up, that this is what the takeaways were. And this is how I see myself moving forward with all this ammunition that I've collected from my experiences. And you see, there's, again, a particular sequence we're following. We're talking about an incident or some stories. We're saying this is what we learned from them. And this is what our takeaways are. And now our worldview looks like this, and this is how we're going to take all of this information or knowledge and move forward in life using these in our favor. And the impression thing, again, when you read the last few lines or the conclusion, you can do this test again with people who are reasonably well read, or even if they're not, that's okay. You want to ask them that, does it leave a lasting impression on their minds? That's the key question. So that ideally, when the admissions officer reads your essay and is done, and he's like, oh, this was great, and then, for example, if they stop reading that day, it's something that is stuck in their mind. And that's absolutely easier said than done. It's not an easy thing to do. So, some key points. Okay, for the next segment, I'm going to move on to how we can bring AI into play. But Mazlum, we have some questions. We want to take them now.
Yes, I know. Thank you for that. I think it's really helpful what you said about selecting the right prompt, but also like going forward and making that prompt readable by the person on the other end, which is like the admissions officer and like what they're thinking as well. But yeah, just based on like that, I know like there was a question about if a prompt that they've selected covers, for example, background stuff like that, but it's also something that's being asked in like a separate supplemental essay. So like how would you kind of like there might be repetition in the common application that way if like two things are being asked in like two different essays. So like would you advise them to select a different prompt than like what might be asked in like the supplemental essay as well?
Actually, no, I wouldn't ask them to select a different supplemental essay, because it comes directly to one of the things I wanted to point out, is that it's actually an ideal case scenario for your essay to go hand in hand with the supplemental essays, because it makes for a much more coherent story. So it is actually going in your favor. What it means is that you're presenting something, that's authentically there. So if your Common App, if your essay prompt is discussing something that the supplement also is touching upon, what you want to do is make sure that there's a perspective or an angle that is not covered in the essay, so that when you respond to the supplemental essay, you're adding value and meaning to the essay you've written in the Common App prompt. So that's totally fine. And no, the answer is you should not change your prompt simply because the supplement has a bit of overlap with it. You don't have to worry about it. Just be sure, don't repeat. You have to think of words as your weapon. So if you have 650 on the Common App essay prompt, for example, let's say the supplement allows you 150. Now those 150 words are supposed to take you one or two levels higher. So, that's add value to it. But it's okay if it touches upon something similar.
You know, that's very interesting. And yes, finally, for like this segment, I know you also talked about, which I mean, I've been hearing like all my life when I was applying to university that, you need to sell a narrative, stuff like that. But I think it was really interesting how you said it's not just a narrative, but it's like how that narrative has shaped you as a person. So I feel like, and when that comes in common applications, like, even for me, like I wanted, like, there was a lot of like personal situations, things I wanted to talk about. Sometimes I was feeling like I'm oversharing something as well. And I think similarly, there's a question about, a tragic event or like a death of someone, affecting someone. So like, do you think like it's a good essay topic or like, like how can like people, what do you call it? Describe like it beyond a
Yeah.
narrative only.
Yeah, so it says, can a tragic event or death of someone we love that affected us and changed our lives be a good essay topic, or is it too distressful? I think you could absolutely talk about it. That's very relatable because unfortunately, I lost my parents 6 months apart. So I know how shattering of an experience that is. You know, it really shakes you up. And in my experience, for example, I literally had to learn how to live again. And I'm sure anybody who's experienced it can find that relatable. It's okay. You can talk about it because it's a deeply personal experience. And by the way, the admissions officer are looking for deeply personal experiences. So you don't have to worry that it may sound too sad. It's a reality. It's a sad reality that we all have to face. The officers know that as well. So it's totally fine. You can talk about it. And in fact, I think you might be able to write a very powerful essay on it because the emotions are so real and they're so raw and they're so deep that you can really bring that, in your favor. You can discuss it in a way that helps you stand out. So it's okay.
Right, no, that's really helpful. And then I think there was just one more question similar about that as well, which I think you kind of answered with this one, which is yeah, same but with like COVID-19. But yeah, I think I would just want to ask you like one thing, like a lot of people will be talking about giving the admissions team, a narrative about like COVID-19. How could you like, do you think the admission officers might just be like sick and tired of like listening to this word, or how can you still make them want to read, more of this?
That's
And
actually
this,
that's a great question.
yeah.
I think I really do think it's gonna get kind of tiring for them to see it again and again, and probably a lot of students are gonna do it. And one of the things we talked about in the sense of not being generic, if you think you have a really interesting angle on the COVID-19 or the pandemic, that's fine. But I would say don't go into it unless you think that skipping it would hurt your application. So that's again a litmus test you can use. If you think that not addressing it reduces your odds by some significant margin, then address it. If not, don't talk about it because I'm sure thousands of students are going to do it. And again, you just get lost in a sea of generic thing that people are picking up on. It doesn't give them anything exciting to read about. And for example, you see, if somebody were to say, I failed in eighth grade, I failed math, I was really upset. And then, I vowed to myself, I'll never allow that to happen. Again, could work, but, nothing special. It's too generic. Happens to so many people. A very typical story. So, yeah, that's my response. I'd say don't do it unless it's necessary. And then the COVID-19 thing, struggle or death of a family member and how it affected your academic performance. Of course, it's okay to mention it. Just make sure it ties back in and has good reason for being there.
All right, that's great. And I think that kind of covers like the chat, the go questions we had in the chat for now. So we can move on to the next segment.
All right. So what we're going to do is I have an essay here that we're going to discuss as a sample so that you people can see, how we can use some AI tools to have the whole thing in our favor. And I will share my screen. Okay. I'll give you a couple of minutes. Can you just quickly go ahead and read it so that you can make sense of everything we're about to do? So let's just take a few minutes and just read it. Oh, that's the prompt. So I'll get rid of that. The prompt is on the left, so you can see what the prompt is.
I heard this essay got someone into Harvard, by the way.
Sorry?
I heard this essay got someone into Harvard.
Oh, yeah, that's right. All right, so can somebody just send a message in the chat? Are you guys done reading it, or do you need about another minute? Okay. All right, so now some things that we can look at. One is if we come into an essay review, you could ask it an overall critique, do sentence by sentence. But first, let's just go ahead and ask it some questions. For example, we would say, how would you rate my essay out of 10? Okay, now it says 7, for example. Let's say, now you want to ask it for things that we've already discussed. So number one, if you want to use AI, by the way, you're never going to be able to use it powerfully unless you understand the fundamentals of whatever you're trying to achieve. In this case, if you don't understand what constitutes or what makes a great essay, the AI is not going to be able to save the day for you. So again, that's why it's important for you to know that before even speaking to the AI. And then say, okay, um, do I have a strong, interesting opening, for example? Let's see what it says about that. Yes, you have a strong and interesting opening. The way you describe numbers in Sudoku immediately captures attention and sets a unique tone. The transition into your personal connection with math and your grandmother is both engaging and heartwarming. It effectively introduces your background and interest in a meaningful way. Great job, right? So we've ticked one box off. We've asked it, it says good. All right, now we're going to say, um, what do you think about the structure and flow of my essay? We're asking a very specific question. Has a strong and engaging opening that draws the reader in with a personal anecdote. And then the structure effectively ties your love for math and Sudoku to your relationship with a grandmother. However, consider expanding on how this background has shaped your identity and interests today. And actually, that is, you could say, one of the weaknesses or one of the limitations in this essay. It's a really good essay, but again, there is room for improvement. Ensure the transition between past experiences and their current impact is smooth, and also make sure the essay fully addresses the prompt by explicitly connecting your story to why your application would be incomplete without this aspect of your life. That's a great point. You see, what does the prompt say? Some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that's so meaningful, they believe their application would be incomplete without it. And that's a big statement, or it's a tall claim to make. If this sounds like you, share your story. Now, this essay doesn't really do that. You see, now it's a good essay. They've done really well. Again, the admission officers are not looking for perfection. It doesn't exist, at least not in writing. In math, we can hit perfection, for instance. Now, in this case, we would say, okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to now ask it again to help me do that. Okay, what do you reckon is the best way for me to talk about why the application would be incomplete without this information? Let's see what it says to that. So we're trying to use it as a guide and a personal assistant. There you go. Focus on how your experiences with Sudoku and your grandmother shaped your identity, interests, and talents. Highlight the impact these moments had on your love for math. A great point again. You see, that's what they're looking for. Those things, those experiences, what impact did they have? And then problem solving.